Hi everyone, it's Jerry. I'm on chess.com right now, and I just went into a friend's game, and I'm just going to give a brief review of it. I believe this will be one of the shorter ones that I've done so far. This was a 10-minute game that was played. This, by the way, was not a game that was sent to me. I know many of you send me games, but I don't review the games that are necessarily sent to me. So I'm pulling this from a friends list, so if you want to befriend me on chess.com, feel free to do that. This one here, again, it was a 10-minute game, and the ratings were approximately 1750. And I found something to, or a few things here to be pointing out in the middle game out of this C3 Sicilian. Right here is the first point that I'd like to touch upon, and that is Black's next move here, knight c6. There's a big difference here between knight c6 and d6. After this routine-like move by Black of knight c6, what we can note here is the knight on d5 is easily challenged with knight c3. And I bring that up because if d6 were played, you'll notice knight c3 is not such a great move, because Black is in a position to take and then take yet again, and this is a very good position for the Black side. White has a damaged pawn structure and goes uncastled, and there is no compensation for that. So getting back to this point here, instead of knight c6, maybe a better way to go about it is to first insert d6 so that this central knight is not as easily challenged. Okay, but knight c6 was on, knight c3, and we have this structural change. White has a very nice center, well supported on d4, and a space advantage already at this point with the pawn on e5, so this will be a bit cramping to the Black king side. Moving forward a bit, we have d5, bishop d3, the perfect diagonal for the bishop. Certainly want to make sure on the white side that this bishop is not easily deployed to f5 with then the follow-up of e6. This here is the problem bishop for Black. Keep this in mind. This is a very important detail in this game. With the fixed pawn structure, the pawn on d5, and these guys on dark squares here, we can identify the good and bad bishops. He's fixed on a light square, so that means he's the bad bishop. These guys are fixed on dark squares, or these two, I should say. They're fixed on dark squares, which means he's the bad bishop. So after bishop d3, we have e6. Also worth noting is this here. This is a backward pawn. This is a half-open file, so we can expect or we should anticipate, really, both sides pressure against c3. Black should be quick to try and get a rook on the c file, maneuvering this knight into the a5 and c4 squares. This actually does play out, and White will have to, of course, devote a piece to this pawn's defense. Okay, let's move forward here. This next move is a very important one, knight f3, and this is such a common move, of course, to develop the knight like so, but there are other options here. You know, when we have a position such as this, when we look at the structure in the center, this pawn on e5, he is cramping to the Black kingside position, and this right here, this guy on e5, can be our cue. If we're playing on the white side here, this can be our cue to know that there might be some attack that we could generate potentially against this Black king, especially if he is going kingside, if he is castling on this side of the board where we have a space advantage. Now, when we played this knight f3 move, this supernatural reflexive type of move, knight f3, this is getting in the way of our queen. Now, with this pawn on e5, oftentimes a queen coming out to g4 or even h5, and then playing the knight to f3 is a nice simple reorganization of one's pieces to, in other words, get the queen out to a more aggressive position before declaring the knight's intention on f3. Now, one of the suggestions by the computer at this moment was to play knight to h3. And as I was looking further, going with this knight to f3 move, playing a few more moves out, I was noticing that the computer at this point was suggesting other moves like knight to e1. What is this doing? This is clearing the way for the queen to try to come out in this direction. So these are, this knight is in a sense here getting in the way of our queen having this very nice activity on g4 and h5, squares that would normally be defended by a black knight on this f6 square, but clearly that's not going to happen because of this pawn on e5, right? We can't even see see how this knight would somehow even get to this f6 square, but this is a space advantage. We have the potential to attack, so we can't go necessarily with these routine-like moves. Worth considering is this knight to h3 move, and an additional reason, not just for the reason of trying to get the queen activated, or staying out of the queen's way so that she can play to g4 and h5, but maybe another idea is to press forward with the f-pawn. Judging by this pawn structure and how they are staggered here, if we draw a line from the base point to the lead pawn, this is the direction we would like to go in. So this would be the next pawn break that white could potentially be looking into. That's just an additional reason for maybe wanting to deploy the knight to h3. And maybe even there's thoughts of playing to f4 and h5. A knight on h5 can be super annoying to the black kingside position, putting pressure on g7, and if this pawn is ever moving, he could jump into that perfect home on f6. Alright, well, in the game it was knight f3, and it's very easy to just have a very difficult game. After knight f3, bishop e7, some very natural moves, castles, everything seems fine, right? We're developing rook b1, half open file, but it gets to a point, unfortunately, where it's difficult to do anything on the white side. Black has a clear plan. b6 is there to defend against that one move threat. There was also knight a5 there. You know, maybe that's even an improvement on the black side here, to not even waste time with moving that pawn. This knight would really like to keep a close eye on c4. You could knock out two birds with one stone, right? He's there to watch over the pawn, and not long off maybe jump into that c4 square. So maybe that's a slight way, or a slight improvement on the black side to jump into a5. But of course b6 is not a bad move. Bishop to f4, and it's a developing move, but it's not really doing much, and it starts to become quite difficult for white at this point here. After rook to c8, bishop to b5, this is really the main problem that I noticed in this game. This bishop playing to b5, keep in mind what I was pointing out earlier, this is black's bad bishop, this is white's good bishop, and white is going in a direction now where they're welcoming this type of an exchange, so this is a wrong idea. This will be helping black, and we see that take shape soon enough. After knight to a5, bishop takes, queen takes, black is simply the better side at this point. There's not really a way to generate an attack against the king, and I mean, we're just a handful of moves into the game, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult. I mean, we're going to have a knight on c4. How can you get rid of them even if these knights are exchanged? Black has a situation where it's now a good versus bad bishop in black's favor. Black doesn't really let this one slip, making some nice moves here. h6, just watching over that g5 square. Black will soon castle and pile up on that c3 pawn, and he's going to be picked right up. Knight d2, trying to watch out for these squares. There's not enough attacking pieces for white to do anything against that black king. Queen a4, knight b3, I believe this was a wise choice on the black side to not take here. Taking on this square will help white to repair that weakened c4 square. So instead we have knight c4, knight d2, black prepares to double, knight takes, queen takes, and there's not really much to do here. Have g5. This is a bit uncomfortable to defend against this pawn. Maybe to avoid this lashing out type of move on the black side, just to be super cautious. I mean, one thing black can do is castle at this moment. You know, moves like this, well, you could kind of duck, throw your king in the corner, get out of the pin in that way, just so you're not making that type of a committal move. But yeah, it's very difficult right now. Black has a very good light square control. g5 is super committal, but there's not really a way to take advantage of this g5 advance. Black grabs a pawn, everything is covered. And after f4, c3 is falling, the bishop is hit, and this is just going to crumble right now. This is a lost position. A lot of exchanges come about. Black has these passed pawns. Everything is crumbling, but the result, the rest of these moves here in this endgame are irrelevant. Black is just going to be the better side. Not really a way to improve, not a great way, at least as far as I could tell, to improve upon how black proceeded in this winning endgame. But I think the main point here is, first, this not getting caught up in the routine-like moves. Sometimes these are not necessarily the best move. We have to take into account this pawn structure, knowing that e5 is that e5 pawn can be telling us things. Namely, we could have an attack against the king. Let me actually highlight one other thing. Let's run with the knight h3. Let's just look at these routine-like moves. I put this on the board against the computer, and it's already close to winning for white. Queen h5, hitting at h7. And how do you defend? This right here is weakening the dark squares. We have now queen h6. Knight g5 is right around the corner. He's potentially going to be exchanged off. Pressure against h7. This is crumbling. Too weakening a position on the black side, and if something like this, well, that's not lasting. White is going to smash right through. Mate threat on h7. If f5 is played, we're just taking. It's still a mate threat on h7. The bishop's hit. Black is crumbling with just very natural moves as a follow-up, right? We can very easily see knight h3, and after bishop e7, castles, but queen h5, and it's already big trouble for black. I don't believe that it's even savable here with strong play on the white side. And some weaknesses will be created here, clearly. We saw h6 doesn't work, and g6, that's killing these dark squares. So this was the first moment not to go with the natural knight to f3, but to stay out of the queen's way. Knight h3 would have been better. And this point right here, on the black side at least, to just go with knight a5, be a better way to defend and keep an eye on the c4 square. And I guess the last point is this right here. This is, as it turns out, just the wrong idea. You certainly want to preserve this light square bishop. What might be better is, it's tough to say, but maybe bring the knight back to d2, and I'm struggling to even come up with a good suggestion at this point. As I was going over it with the computer, after bishop f4, it really started to like the black side. Not by much, but really no advantage for the white side. One reason to even, if we compare these two squares, usually if we could place a bishop on a fourth rank, it's maybe a little bit more influential to the position when compared to, let's say, a third rank bishop, but he's maybe even getting in the way of this f-pawn. If this one day can be an idea, well, he's going to have to move again. To try and get this pawn up here, he's getting in the way of the f-pawn. Planting the bishop on e3 is going to be a better choice, but still, things are coming all the way back to this knight being deployed to f3. Consider, certainly, knight h3 when we have this pawn on e5. Keep this diagonal open for the queen to maybe play a role in an attack against the king, and I think there'd be a much better result in this one. But it was a tough road ahead again as soon as the light square bishops were exchanged. This is tipping in black's favor, and it's very difficult. There's no way to repair these weakened squares, that c4 square in particular. And that's why we had the queen side crumbling and the game proceeding like so. There wasn't, again, any hope at this point for Team White. But anyhow, that's all I wanted to really touch on. I probably went over I went over this maybe in too much detail, longer than I wanted to, but hopefully there were some things to take away from this. And as always, I hope you got something out of it. Take care. Bye.